John, you gonna apply for the job?
No.
You don't want to be forest supervisor?
Someday. I'm not ready for it yet, though. This is complex for us.
Speaking of that, what's the program of work? We could say that again. Let's get going.
Okay, we're not expecting anybody else.
No,
It's 10 after.
It's 10 after that.
Games begin.
Even Trinity County, that counts as like start time.
No, we're done.
So I've never been to one of these.
Me neither.
I don't think I have.
Kelly, I mean, so I don't know how this program of work stuff goes.
So who's been to these before? Joseph and myself and Jerry. So they're typically at the Forest Service conference room at the compound there, and they have gluten-free baked goods. Well, but you've been to this before, Tom. There's usually lots of handouts and stuff to look at. And you got anything for us?
Not really.
And we're kind of just observers to the group of Forest Service people talking about.
No. I don't see it that way. I see it as we're active participants in.
Joseph looks like he's the only one.
I have the SOPA
Good.
Yeah.
with all the active projects on it for this forest.
And you've had your internal program of work meeting already too, right?
We did.
So do you don't have anything to show us?
I don't specifically because I'm slack,
I wanna go
but
look
I
at
do
this.
have things to speak about, and I can provide that to the facilitation group afterwards so that you have the notes that I'm essentially speaking off of.
Was that the one I got?
So is there a link to this?
Yeah, this is the.
Yeah.
So really, it's more of a discussion even beyond that. I see the program of work committee is really, that broader group of what are we doing, where are we going, is there support for certain projects? At least when we first started the collaborative, that's definitely the role of the program of work. Honestly, we had many discussions just during a regular meeting or the forestry subgroup committee, whatever the right terminology is.
Fuel break.
In the beginning, there was a bigger group than this who came. Roger was there and all sorts of people came.
Clarence.
Yeah, there was,
About,
Larry couldn't make it.
neither one of them was there because the decision was been
The
made.
gist of it in my mind is
And now it's litigated.
pushing for the collaborative's priorities
Right.
being your priorities.
That's
That's the gist.
Yeah.
Right.
So, part of that discussion is what is the capacity, right? So if our priority that I get from the forest supervisor and from the regional office is that we have to clear those off, then my capacity isn't as great to do those big projects, to do the projects
But
collaborative.
no, it's got a few more steps to make a project.
So from the collaborative, so where's our projects on the scope of work?
Yeah.
On our list, where is it?
So let's go through that.
Yeah.
So I wrote two different things. One is staffing and the other is the project status. We already talked about the district ranger for TRMU. So Jeff Mai will be here next week as the detailer until February. Jeff Mai. He's a research person in the Forest Service from Colorado. Related to Christine Mai, who's the forest hydrologist. Used to be related. They
Right.
separated.
More than we need to know.
But, he does know the area, he does have that connection, so he'll be here until February. And then Joe Smales, I'm not exactly sure how that last name is pronounced, but phonetically.
So Jeffrey Maya is going to be the detail here until then? Oh, okay, got ya.
Leslie Yin is back from her detail on the Tahoe Basin. Dave's retiring. At this point, there's no word of a detailer or them flying the job. So we don't know how that's all going to play out once he retires at the end of December.
So Tom, there's still a hiring freeze on. Does that mean it has to be a lateral transfer? It can't be a new hire?
So we have to get permission from the secretary. USDA apparently didn't submit or the Forest Service hasn't submitted an approved plan. So like the Department of Interior has approved plans, and the BLM, they can only lateral. That's part of the plan that they have developed. For the Forest Service, we have to get approval from the secretary to fly a job. And so how they've done that is they do that essentially in batches. We've had We have one blanket authorization for law enforcement and safety, which includes our firefighters. Line officers aren't included in that, so district rangers or forest supervisors aren't included in that blanket. And so we've had one sort of exemption round that has been approved. We've submitted all of our recent vacancies, which essentially are 20 vacancies out of the 40 that we have on the force that we want to fill. We submitted 20 in this last round to try to get filled, essentially based on the budget that we expect. So this year we saw a 5% reduction in our budgets pretty much across the board for the
Forest-wide or?
Forest-wide.
Or,
And the forest soup is not one of the 20 you applied for.
Correct, because that wasn't a known thing
Right.
at the time. And so, you know, the region could have submitted that, but I don't know the timing if that actually worked out or not. Next year, looking at what they're projecting, it's like 15 to 20% reduction across the forest. So even big budget line items like NFTM, we're looking at like a $600,000 reduction in our budget next year. So recreation and special uses took the biggest hit this year. They actually saw a 30% reduction from what we saw last year. So we're kind of scrambling with shifts of what we're doing with that. Some of those with moves of personnel internally to try to cover some of those needs that we have for special uses and recreation.
While you're talking about staffing, can you update us on LE for West Side?
Yeah, so there were 2 new law enforcement people hired. Essentially, it's going to take a year for them to be fully effective. But one was Logan Brown. He'll be out of the Hayfork, Harrison Gulch sort of area. And the other one is Matt Swanson, and he'll be out of Weaverville. I guess they hired somebody in Eureka as well, so they hired 3 overall within the range that.
When do you expect the 2 to come on duty?
So they're technically on duty right now,
Well,
but they're not
here.
fully functional until probably another year from now.
Wow.
Because they got to go through FLETC and all of those other things.
I was just gonna ask what means fully functional.
So,
What do
you
you
know,
have to do?
being able to tote a gun and, you
So
know,
it's training?
write tickets and,
Okay.
yeah, firearms training, all that kind of stuff.
Certifications.
So next growing season, they won't be on the job then, huh?
So they may be in training, which some of that is ride-alongs and that they may be on the ground, they're just not independent, right? They'll have to be tagging along with a fully qualified officer, is my understanding.
And there isn't one here, so we'll be riding along somewhere else.
Correct. Or, you know, there's enough that we bring in, you know, at least during the growing season, that maybe they're here. I don't really know. Again, law enforcement is a stovepipe organization, so honestly, some of our partners have better relationships with our law enforcement than I do as a district ranger.
So Cal Fish and Wildlife has been pretty active. Have they gone on to public lands and done some bust or just private?
Yeah, so it's really that task force mentality that they do with feds and state and even local law enforcement that, you know, when they go out and do interdiction or a bust or those grow sites, they do it as a team. So they have that authority.
But they are hitting some public land growth.
They are, absolutely.
Good.
So 2 different organization sort of changes. One is the recreation organization. We're kind of bringing in the west side of the NRA rec organization into a west side whole organization. So Sally Cousins will be the new rec officer for the west side starting in January. And Phyllis Swanson, who was really just focused on the Trinity Lake side of the NRA, will actually start covering the entire west side for developed rec. So what we're looking at is there will be Sally as the supervisor, there will be 3 GS9s under her, Mike McFadden as wilderness and trails, Phyllis Swanson for developed rec, and then Barb Ramey for rec special uses. And then the organizations that are sort of.
So that's autonomous from the Shasta side then?
Yeah, so that'll all be under the district ranger here on the TRMU and will cover the entire west side. And so, you know, there will be a lot more direct connection to even the management of Trinity Lake, although there's still a lot of concessionaires and that still is what it is. Sally will still work on the marinas here on the Trinity Lake side of the NRA, although there's still those connections.
Yeah,
and it's still the NRA.
At the NRA meeting last Friday, Leslie said she'd bring a organization chart and kind of describe that at the full collaborative in December on how they think that's going to work. Though there's, like you said, they're still working out some of the finer points of who's doing what.
Yeah, definitely. So at this point, we almost had nobody. They've been really focused either on the Trinity Alps. There hasn't been a lot of representation for Yellow Wilderness or the Chancelloula Wilderness, trails on South Fork Management Unit or down the river, rec sites. This is trying to at least have somebody that's looking at all of those things. Although, capacity is still going to be an issue. So that's the rec organization and some changes with that. Again, any vacancies that we have are sort of in this hiring freeze. The other organization that has seen huge changes is our timber and silviculture forestry sort of organization. So Anna Arnold retired. She was the Westside TMO, timber management officer, or implementation forester. So with her retirement, Kelly McElroy used to help with planning on the west side. She got the promotion to the forest silviculturist. Essentially all we have is Randy Paris as the 11 right now. We're looking to actually fill another GS11 as a planning forester, and Randy's actually going to shift into the implementation forester. There's a transition with that she will still wrap up the projects that she's assigned to, so the pilot project, Burnt Ranch, Dubukela, those 3 projects that she was already assigned to from a planning perspective. But any new projects, we don't have the capacity right now from that forestry standpoint. So we either need to bring in outside help to help move those forward from a forestry, silviculture, planning perspective, or this was part of the request for an exemption is to fill that planning forester silviculture position. Underneath that prep organization, Jim Schaefer retired, Leslie Horta moved into the planning organization. We did hire Kobe Salmon at the last Society of American Foresters, so Kobe has been here for about a year, doing a great job, but still pretty new. And all the other positions in that forestry organization have either retired or moved on. So we're missing another GS9 professional forester, a GS9 prep tech, a GS7, and a GS6, all in that prep organization. So there's nobody essentially in that prep organization right now. All of those have been submitted, but until we get that approval from USDA, we can't move forward with that.
There was talk about contracting lots of the ID team stuff, biologist stuff through Watershed Center and RCD. Is there, number 1, is there funding for that? And number 2, is there funding for these other job requirements as well?
So there is right now to fill these positions, and then there was money, at least for the pilot project. There was an agreement for how do we move things forward for the pilot project. Some of that is what was that capacity. Some of those things have changed when we first identified that. There was botany, there was hydrology. Since then, we hired a hydrologist, and is actually probably more functional to just do that in-house. But that money's still there and potentially could be shifted, although we've used quite a bit of that, right, Kelly? Mm-hmm. So we did botany surveys. We've struggled a little bit with what those botany surveys actually did for us. And that's some of what the pilot project really was for, is, how do we explore some of those opportunities? And we've learned that some things don't work like we would like them to, and other things do. And we struggled with that even with the Watershed Center of, in-house expertise, right? Dave Jaramillo, we brought in for the stand exams. He had not done stand exams that we were looking for, and so that took a lot more time and effort, more money than what we thought it was going to take. And the capacity to then take on that planning forester, writing a specialist report, what is the silviculture prescription, they didn't have that capacity. That's not to say that they're not moving towards that, but that's not something that we thought that was there, and it wasn't. So we've been struggling a little bit with that. of, you know, what are the actual availability that we can bring in. We know that we have professional foresters like Ken Baldwin and other people like that. That takes money. That's where we're starting to struggle, is what is the priority between implementation and planning, knowing that our budgets are going down. Implementation is the priority that we're getting from the region, especially with this administration.
If you have a plan, so.
Well, at this point, you know, Westside Plantation looks better and better because it's a signed NEPA, right? And those things that are close to a decision, that's why that becomes the priority of just get that done. That marginal difference of getting that out as opposed to finding something.
So Tom, when you mentioned Ann and Arnold retiring, that also meant that Mark retired too, right?
Yes.
So we lost an archaeologist in that specialty.
Which is actually probably
Created a bigger gap.
right now.
Yeah.
Because there were so many things on Mark's plate, especially related to PG&E and Caltrans sort of emergency things that they keep walking in the door. All the planning projects that I'll go over, all those things are on Mark's plate at some level to get it done. We've flown in detail. We have the ability to do that. This next week, we'll make hopefully a selection. We haven't got a great outreach response, but we've gotten some. So hopefully we'll at least have somebody here until we can get that approval from USDA to fill that position. So we have a strategy for the timber organization. There are definitely holes, there's capacity issues there, but archaeology is probably the bigger impact right now because there's just no way. Mark was it for the West Side. We kept trying to fill that position and we just couldn't pick somebody up.
So yeah, so my understanding from last Friday, the NRA meeting, is it means that, you know, that NRA-related projects will take a hit, you know, because Pete from over there will have to help fill in, you know, on other projects.
And that really comes down to prioritization.
Yeah,
It's been a marginal effect right now.
And they took the big hit in the budget.
Yeah.
Is Virginia Jones still on a detail?
She is still on a detail. Who's the detailer behind her? From the Klamath, there's somebody that came in. I can't recall her name right now. So
She's
there's somebody
an
sitting in
engineer,
that
right?
position.
The forest engineer.
Yeah. I can look at my notes from, that we talked about that.
Any other questions on staffing and organization?
I guess a related question, status of the pilot project. So the last thing we got from you was you wanted to put the scope, go out to scoping, I think it was.
And we did that.
And you asked if that was okay, and I had some specific comments, and I asked you specifically what you thought about it, and I never heard anything, so it did go out to scoping.
So it did, because remember we did the workshop, that was following scoping. So I'm a little lost.
There was an email, I remember one of my specific responses was, it doesn't say no new roads in there, and that seems like it gets rid of red flags because we all agreed to that, and I didn't see it in there, and I don't remember what the process was. What did that lead to? Wasn't that the pilot?
Yeah, potentially. So it does say that there's no temp roads, there's only access ramps of 100 feet or less.
Anyway, so where's the pilot project in the status-wise? Where is it?
So I'm ashamed, but it's been delayed because of all the things that, you know, capacity issues and the fires that we had this summer. You know, at this point, that is the highest priority. The salvage project is in the regional office. You're going through the objection period, so really everybody is focused on the pilot project.
And where is it at?
Honestly, we're still working on articulating what those alternatives are that we worked on in that workshop. We've had personnel issues of actually getting those tasks done that have been assigned. So capacity issues and, you know, people not performing for what they've been doing. And then, you know, just the shift in prioritization given the fires.
So what's your best guess for a signed document?
So we worked that out yesterday. Sorry, my computer went to sleep.
So it says May next year.
So So that means implementation could happen next season, it starts at the start of it.
It has the same date for both the decision and the expected implementation, but remember that Forest Service counts implementation before it actually happens. When they make the decision, it's implemented, I guess, right?
No, it's not. How we track targets, when we let a contract or an agreement, that's when we count that target. But implementation could take 3 to 5 years after that agreement or contract is. So the decision, that's not when that's technically implemented. And so we're looking at alternatives this month, specialist reports in February and March. So we worked on the existing condition, that's all set. It just comes down to the effects analysis. What we're struggling with is what does Fish and Wildlife Service, how do we get that out the door before there's sort of that agreed to effects analysis? Within their streamlining consultation, we've seen that shift, that burden shift to us, that essentially our timeline expands, and so we get that agreement with them of what the effects are, what the mitigation measures are, all of those different things. And we know that we've been working with them the entire time, but with Christine Jordan, that's still a new player. And we don't know exactly how that's going to play out. If we revert back to, previous methods.
Your best guess for implementation is early summer next year.
I would say midsummer.
Start of the
Yeah.
And it could go for how many seasons?
So that really depends on how we want to lay that out. I think the intent is to try to do a shorter contract so that we can actually save the implementation. And so we just write it in that way, 1 year, 2 year contracts instead of a 5-year contract.
What are you guys talking about? What project?
Pilot project.
Roadside shade,
Okay.
fuel break, and plantation thin.
Okay.
And that has stayed the same, still the 8 road and 10 road?
Yeah.
Yeah, not changing, it's,
You mentioned the alternatives are the impediment. How many alternatives do you have to address?
So I think we identified three alternatives. One was a reduced buffer. One was a reduction in the mechanical equipment that were used specifically in riparian reserves, and another one was minimization of impacts to NSO. So changing your prescription in LSR, potentially having diameter limit. I think those are the major ones. So there were multiple comments that we're trying to, have a theme for an alternative.
Okay, so these were comments that came from the public or this group?
No,
No, from the public.
from the public. I mean, there were comments from individuals that were part of the collaborative.
Okay,
But
yeah, that's what I remember talking about. One of them was Epic and then,
Conservation Congress.
right, so, yeah, okay.
Those
So
were
they,
the two biggest letters.
all right, so they have given you conditions, alternatives that you have to address before you can move forward because of the issues they've raised.
Correct.
So frankly, specifically relating to that, it's been more frustrating watching the back and forth with you and Epic when she's saying, don't stop on our account, it's a pilot project, go ahead and do your thing, we don't want to be an impediment, we'll reevaluate before you do the main project. And I see you keep struggling to try and incorporate it and work with her stuff, and she keeps saying, no, don't stop on our account.
so are you through with the conversation with Epic, or are you?
I believe so.
Good. Yeah, went on a bit.
Yeah, and the fires didn't help with that. For the availability that I had to respond.
No, you're right, but just the conversation itself was a little complex.
Yeah. And really we were looking for are we addressing the concerns, or do I need to develop another alternative? Because as we looked into the statements that they made, there were some general statements that they make for most projects, and I technically have to address that, right? And so that's what I was looking for is, are you really looking for that, or can we get down to a more specific this project?
But it's done now, huh?
I believe so.
So Tom, when you finally get a decision and you're ready to let a contract, are you gonna do like you did with West Side Plantations and just offer the commercial timber portion of it? Or are you gonna do a true stewardship thing where the contractor has to deal with all of the different phases of it?
So that's still something that we're considering. At some point, we know that we were successful. We know that there's people that focus on the timber side of that, and there's people that focus on the service side of that. We did get a premium with West Side Plantations, but a lot of that was because of the type of material, the telephone poles that they could get out of those plantations. These are some of the younger plantations in the pilot project area. There are some older in there, and so how that mixes out, I don't think that we would get the same sort of premium that we got at West Side Plantations. We can go either way. It just really comes down to, is there a contractor, or are there people that are able to do both of those things, that they're on the hook for both of those?
So you saw the experience with the Browns project and the community forest, they definitely found it was better to separate those two.
Right.
Keep the service works, yeah.
So that would be my suggestion. I mean, that's where we've seen success, is to try to keep those separate, and the money's still tied together, right? It's still going towards that implementation of that specific grant.
Well, when we had the field trip, we didn't have real knowledgeable representation from your district there. Dave was there, but he didn't really.
For West Side Plantations.
Yeah. So the question was, this is a stewardship project. When do we see the money that's been paid for this put into contracts for the non-commercial portions of that project? And nobody had any idea. They said, well, we don't know.
So it is accumulating. As they take a load of logs, they put money into that pot for stewardship, right? And so when it gets to a certain threshold and we can put together a meaningful contract, then that's what we can do. We do have Joint Chiefs money. The Watershed Center got that CAL FIRE greenhouse gas grant. We got the NIFWIF agreement that the region threw money into. All of those things are implementing West Side Plantations, the other areas. We're going to have some DD work that they're already putting money, or stewardship type work. What we're looking at is there's actually some material that's even in those coal decks or those tops, that there may be somebody that's actually still interested in that. And so what I'd like to do is actually put out and see if there's interest in somebody buying that before we do actually a service contract with that stewardship money for West.
But would you anticipate maybe next summer a service contract?
We can definitely do that. At this point, it really comes down to that capacity for implementation. And so Joint Chiefs, the greenhouse gas that the Watershed Center had, and NIFWIF are all monies going into West Side Plantation right now.
Yeah.
And so do we need to put more money right now, or can I wait a year when I don't have Joint Chiefs and actually do meaningful work in FY19 with the stewardship money?
So the only reason I ask is because at the tour also, one of your staff said, the money doesn't have to stay with this project, that the forest supervisor's office or the RO could find a higher priority project for those accumulated receipts. And so that's a risk.
There is
too,
a risk, absolutely.
especially with these tight budget times. I mean, all of a sudden, the money's being used in the clueless, or
Right.
God knows where. So anyway,
the risk
we
is
need
not-
to somehow make sure that we guard that money. And
The risk is not West Side Plantations right now, because, we're still accumulating that money. It's not a big enough pot for the region to say, oh, that's a chunk of money that we need to spend down. It's actually East Side money that they have for their stewardship projects that is potentially at risk. And so it's a forest pot of money. There's not technically, it's for West Side Plantation. We account for it on a project specific basis on this forest, but the region has definitely we're starting to get bigger and bigger pushes to spin down what we think of as perms and trusts. So BD and KV stewardship is starting to become, we saw that with fire settlement, that they took money from Sims, that because of the pressure that they're getting from the administration of, well, why are you complaining? You have these big pots of money. Why do you need more money? Why do we need a fire funding fix? They're hitting all of those accounts that have money in them to try to spend them now. And so absolutely, that's a risk. That's a huge change from what we've seen in the past.
What can the collaborative do to help?
So sooner the better is one.
So the strategy that we've been talking about is actually to say, okay, if the east side has a pot of money for stewardship and we have the ability to put that into a contract for service work on the west side, let's use technically that pot of money, and then the west side pot of money, as it accumulates, goes back and for the east side. So, you know, we're still accounting for the right amount of money.
More than defensiveness, we go offense. And we start trying to suck
We'll be the
other
ones
people.
taking the money.
That's right.
And we
yeah.
typically are, because we have that capacity on Shasta Trinity as a whole, but especially with Westside Plantation, with that big of a project for implementation, we are the recipients of money from the region.
And thinking beyond trees and brush and that sort of thing, we've got Cynthia, are there road related? Because I mean, it doesn't have to go to fuel reduction necessarily or forestry. It could also go to, you know, road work that needs to be done, right?
Right, and there were some things identified in Westside Plantations, the ones that we have on our plate, but that's something that David and Cynthia still need to work out, are the PG&E transmission line sediment salvage from the 2015. That the NEPA decision was signed. That's something that needs to be implemented. The larger salvage project, once that decision's signed, that's actually a ton of work. That gets us opportunities to compete for money, to put money towards implementation on those. Browns and Gimmel, I guess there's still roads as part of the NEPA decision for Browns, the NEPA decision for Gimmel that can and will be implemented. I don't know, you know, we've been working on old decisions. Are there anything from like East Fork or Smoky or the ones that we've been trying to
Yeah,
get done?
there's still roads that have, there's still roads that are identified for decom. You've been kind of parsing those out, and so I have, you know, a list of roads that are available. Some of it was in that Texas Spider area, and I don't know the status of that. The Gimmel for that, is that still under litigation?
No, so the litigation is technically done, but we're doing a supplemental information report based on the impacts of the fire. And so we're not going to implement any of the vegetation piece of that until that's done. But technically the decision is valid currently. We want to make sure that, you know.
So there were a few roads that were outside of units, and I was told that once it was litigated that those could go forward. And then your comment and Kelly's was that there may be more, and it's probably based on that supplemental. So I guess at this point, because we have some funding opportunities coming up, it would be, could we go with those original roads that weren't part of that in lieu of waiting for the supplemental, not knowing the timing on when that may be done?
Right. Yeah, so
Is there a
David has that
timing on the
information, and that's
supplemental?
the idea. So we're looking at like March for that to be completely done, because really what we need to do is to ask Fish and Wildlife Service for technical assistance to make sure that they're on the same page that we are for any determinations on northern spotted owl.
So I'll get with David and Kelly and see if it's not an opportunity for the ones that were outside, the ones that we initially had gotten approved by you were outside of all the units. Because we do have some funding opportunities coming up before March. We could at least maybe get going on those. And on the Browns, there is some road work that's still to be done, and we're waiting on an agreement still at the district. Kelly was going to be working on that. We've been waiting on that for a little while. And I'll talk to David about the PG&E, I guess. And my understanding was that there on the Westside Plantation that there was some road work, but I never really have seen anything. Is the PG&E part of Westside?
No.
No. Okay, it's separate NEPA.
It is.
What was the result of the litigation on Gimmel?
So it went to the Ninth Circuit appeals court, and we didn't have any changes within the project from that finding or that ruling.
And Petty John's still litigating?
So Petty John is in consultation with Fish and Wildlife Service right now. Once we get that back, then the stay is lifted for litigation, and so litigation continues to move forward. Right now, it's on hold
Okay, got it.
until consultation is completed.
So is this one of those stories where Fish and Wildlife has been working, you've been consulting with them all along, but once some milestone happens, then you have to wait for a final report from them that will take another long time?
Correct. So either it's under streamlining and formal consultation either takes 60 days, or it's not under streamlining and it takes 135 days.
Oh, yeah.
I have no idea whether it's under streamlining or not. But it did sound like this is something that they're able to wrap up relatively quickly, like we're looking in the next month or something, for the biological opinion back.
Question and a frustration to vent. Is there any talk of a Helena fire or salvage?
So we'll look at that, but given where both the Buck and the Helena occurred, a lot of that is wilderness, a lot of that is in inventory roadless area and Lake Successional Reserve. And so there are small chunks of that, but is it meaningful? Is there a threat? Is there an opportunity? All of those things, we'll look at it, but I don't know that this will be the large priority that it was for 2015.
It looks dubious to me, and hoping you're not going to go down that rabbit hole. And then the frustration on the agenda for the field trip we just had was looking at the sample mark, and there's no sample mark yet by the projects.
Right.
Guesstimate on when the sample mark's going to happen.
So the idea was that we were going to work with the collaborative to do that, and that really just comes down to my capacity to try to facilitate that, to get that done. So Randy was completely tied up with both Helena and the Buckfire. We're into the hiring time of the year and use or lose. So, what is the timeline of us getting out with the collaborative? Because you just heard, I don't have the capacity to actually do the mark myself.
Right, so with the last collaborative meeting, we talked about Kenneth and Walls going out and doing that before the fall field trip.
Right. And that didn't happen.
Right, so was there talk of it now that you're back?
Yeah. I don't have a timeline on it.
Could we go back to West Side again? On the field trip, it seemed like your representatives there were unclear about whether they were using two chiefs' money or BD money to clean up after the logging. Are they using two chiefs' money in that?
So Westside Plantations is a big thing. For that timber contract, the stewardship timber contract, no, we're not using joint chiefs specifically for that. Some of the weeds work and some of the road work that was a part of that project for that timber sale. There are connections with the joint chiefs with that. But the prescription is the same, and that's why we went and looked at those plantations. Is the prescription, whether it's there or where we are applying the joint chiefs, is the same, and that was the best opportunity for us to connect Six Rivers and Shasta Trinity into one field trip. But no, that'll be either stewardship money. BD, I don't think that BD is actually collected when we have a stewardship contract.
Oh, really?
Because it all goes into stewardship.
Something positive I can say is the West Side treatment is some of the best looking project I've ever seen on federal ground, in my opinion.
Good. So they did use a feller buncher, which is actually a lot lighter on the land for how they're following it.
I don't remember seeing sheared stumps there. Were they? Man?
Yeah, I remember. They said they were using a fellow buncher pretty much.
Some of them have a saw.
Right,
Yeah.
but there's no undercut, no.
Right.
Correct. It's just a flat.
Yeah, and you can see the shear, oh, the saw, yeah.
So it's actually just a big disc that has these
Yeah.
teeth on it. I guess the limit that they had on the equipment that they had out there was like 22-inch DBH, and so, you know, that was perfect for this project because we didn't want them to take anything bigger than that.
And what we saw wasn't very steep. I'm sure they're steeper, but
Yeah, which, you know, when you get out on the landscape, you know, something like that, they can't get onto. It's too steep for them. Slope is kind of an interesting thing, and, you know, they could go straight up and straight down, but, you know, to go up along the unit, especially when you're in a riparian.
that's what we always hear. And Tom Waltz always debunks it and says, it's steeper than your forest plan allows is what he always
Yeah,
says.
so honestly, I think we allowed them to go a little bit steeper, and they're like, I'm not going there, it just wasn't worth it, and this was SPI contractors that was implementing that, so.
And what is the plan for the piles that are out there?
So what we're gonna do is we're gonna see if there's actually still merchantable material in there. We know that Anderson Brownstock is interested in pole material, and so those tops and some of that material actually still maybe. They actually did take some of the tops, the service work that we required as part of West Side Plantations. They had an agreement with SPI to take that. But there
Yeah, I
are-
think that, again, Tom or one of the SPI guys said that that was from 6-inch to 3-inch diameter that they were taking that.
Right, but there's still units that weren't technically serviced, and there wasn't enough of an incentive for SPI to work that out for those other units that could have worked out, that we will probably try to sell that before we burn it.
Because that's kind of what it looks like. It's not kind of sorted at all. It looks like a burn pile.
Yeah. Well, you know, how they laid that out is, it's still pretty straight, it still looks like a pile. You know, it was whole tree yarded, so there's a lot of material that's there, limbs and
It's
other
just
stuff.
after the fact, if you take the tops out of a pile.
There may be enough, and they're looking for that type of material, right? You know, for somebody to try to do, like, if Thule Forest Products was still a thing, that would have been another opportunity for all that kind of material as well. But
So what else, so we've talked about the pilot project in the west side, but what else is on the program of work?
Yeah.
But I'm trying to think, I know I've had conversations at the Fire Safe Council meeting with Larry about where is the Hind Pond Community Protection Project, right?
So the indicator projects are Burnt Ranch, Trinity Alps Prescribed Fire, and Pettyjohn for the Trinity River Management Unit. So those
Indicator?
indicator is essentially the priority word for how Dave operates. Those three have to push from the forest to get it done.
Pettyjohn, Burnt Ranch.
And Trinity Alps Prescribed Fire. For the South Fork Management Unit salvage project, which is in the objection resolution period, we had anticipated a decision by December. The pilot project, that's the highest priority. And as we start to shift out of the salvage project, it's actually the Eubacella insect and disease plantation. That's the big push that we're getting from the regional office for the Farm Bill CE. That's really something that we need to look into for the Hind Pond area. Can we get that designated? That helps with using a CE category.
Is that a 3,000 acre max?
3,000 acre max. You know, the conversations that we've had for Hind Pond are really roads and ridges, and you know, that was actually prior to 2015 fires. It's something that we probably need to re-engage with the Fire Safe Council. I've talked with Dan Ostman. I think it's just a capacity timing issue. So, you know, in the near future, what we'd like to do is actually go back out and have that conversation of, okay, now that the landscape has changed, what do we want to do? What is that project really look like?
Reprioritize.
Well, redesign. You know, it's still a priority. We still want to do something in Hind Pond. Does it look like a roads and plantation project? Does it look like a ridges project that we then try to implement blocks for prescribed fire? You know, what are we trying to achieve exactly? Because there actually is a lot of fire history, recent fire history all around Hind Pond. And So are we just trying to connect the dots and then maintain that?
And so to have this conversation, we need to be, you guys need to instigate it.
Right.
And it hasn't happened yet.
Correct.
And so that's the question, is when will that happen?
So we just need to schedule a fire safe council meeting to actually have a
So,
conversation.
because we were under the assumption it'd be sometime this winter.
Yeah,
That we could just start the conversation about what should be done.
that's my intent.
Okay, and, you know, and you were talking about different prescriptions or different projects, and what I would hope to see is a combination. Bring the West Side Plantation Project to the High-End vicinity, bring the roadside shaded fuel break.
The pilot project design, yeah.
The pilot project, we, you know, tie into it from our community, and then, you know, post-fire prescribed burn, you know, to try to bring all of those things together as a strategic plan for a community,
Right.
as opposed to just single prescriptions that aren't tied to anything else.
Yeah.
So Tom, on the SOPA, it says that's gonna be an EIS. Can't you do it on something less than an EIS? The Iron Bomb project?
I don't know at this point.
Depends on what the plan is.
Right.
Doesn't speak to forest products, it just says fuels management.
And at this point, given high bomb and, you know, what is available out there, that's probably what it looks like. It's probably more of a fuel reduction type of project.
There's some plantations that are fairly old. So until we look at it, I don't know how we can, you know, say what it would be.
Is a 3,000 acre CE, is that bug related?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
So it can be density, which is trying to prevent insect or disease, right? So we definitely have density issues all across the forest. But we're definitely seeing a band, an elevational band, where we're getting insect and disease issues.
So that could
Which is perfect for that Dubuquela area. There's a chunk of Jones Plantation that the tops either froze and blew out or something. There's just tops all over the place.
What's the elevation been?
I don't know specifically.
It's just below, saddles at 5, so yeah, I'd say 35, 4.
And so the Dubuquela project came out of nowhere because of the funding source was available?
No, it came from the Farm Bill that became the priority, and we're getting a really big push to
And so
move
that
that
it
forward.
wasn't something that the collaborative has brought forward.
It wasn't.
And so it's taken
Although-
priority over a lot of other
Money,
projects that
it
have
came
been.
with money. So,
I don't know that it comes with money, does it?
It doesn't.
It only comes with,
No.
no, it's just the authorization for the CE.
Correct.
And it isn't even in the SOPA.
So you guys decided to make that a priority? Because, I mean, I understand why, but it was without collaboration.
Correct. Although I would say that it's consistent with the intent of the
I'm
collaborative
not
as
arguing
expressed.
one way or the other, I'm just.
And my understanding, again, and I think Kelly from last Friday, I think Leslie said, I mean, on the NRA, they're actually getting a big push to deal with trying to do that CE on the east side, and that will probably,
Chalk Mountain.
yeah, that will be sucking specialist time away from projects over here.
Yeah,
But
Which is actually
the push is
the
coming,
push
I mean, it's
that
from
the
DC,
administration-
You know,
yeah. Hard to ignore those.
it's a Washington kind of directive.
It is.
And if we actually had an assistant secretary like we had before, but there's not even one been nominated to replace Robert Bonney at this point.
So that's gonna take planning resources to do that, to do the Camilla one. Is that gonna affect our pilot project?
Probably.
Let alone our green project. So we talked a long time ago about starting the green project work because that was our next priority. And then I've heard debate about you can't start it till you evaluate pilot project.
Yeah, but it was supposed to be.
So the last conversation that I think we had with the field break work group was, we can start thinking about where do we phase, we've learned some of those lessons. we've seen the alternatives that have been proposed, you know, do we tweak this? Do we still have that agreement? That's still a conversation that as we start to design the next phase or the larger project as a whole.
Right, but as far as the next project out the chute, no way.
No, but it is something that we can start to work on. I mean, NEPA projects take time, and essentially for us to really be successful, we can take this year to start to think strategically of, you know, what does that look like? What is the best way to go? How big can we actually get to, given the lessons that we've learned?
Has there been any more talk about doing a programmatic EIS so that, you know?
Not EIS, but programmatic consultation with Fish and Wildlife Service.
This is gonna go on forever, it seems, that, you know, if we're just doing a piece at a time and separate NEPA for each one, it seems like, you know, to really move ahead, we want to do 1,000 miles within 10 years, and, you know, it just doesn't seem like without a programmatic document that you can ever do that kind of NEPA clearance.
So at least with Dave and Terry, that's not something that they want to entertain. With a new forest supervisor, that's something to revisit, absolutely. I think there's an opportunity, especially, you know, if we build that social consensus, that social license, to be able to move that forward. There's definitely risk with that, you know, Conservation Congress specifically.
That's news to me that Dave's not in favor of.
That's specifically, well, programmatic consultation, we've convinced him over time that that is a beneficial thing. But programmatic NEPA, he's not been for it the entire time.
And then we have,
Because we have had that conversation.
we have potential new legislation that could change everything.
Oh, yeah.
You know, potential legislation
You don't-
is
you
just
can't-
potential. Until I have it, it's not a real thing.
Really, definitely.
But the real thing, the tone for today is that no matter how good our thoughts are, your capacity is so limited.
And it's
The
getting
future
more.
is going to be
And
more.
the budget's being cut.
Yeah.
So honestly, that's a conversation that I had with the entire West Side sort of program of work leadership, the 11s that we have on the districts, on the 2 districts right now, is, you know, we're trying to narrow this down and get it down to like 1 or 2 projects instead of 6 as the priority, because we don't have the capacity. Even with 6, we've struggled. You've seen it. We've struggled to move any of those forward effectively. There's always a competing interest. And so at this point, we only have 1 planning team, essentially on the west side of the forest. And for us to operate in any other way, we're not effective. And so we have to start narrowing this down. And to say, okay, we're going to take on another project is probably irresponsible.
And
because
that's
we're
a
not being
salvage?
successful.
Your one project is a salvage?
No, I would say the salvage is almost off of our plate. Implementation-wise, that's not our limitation. Once we can get something through planning, we've been really successful at either getting that into a timber contract or into a service contract, competing for money, working with our partners, whether it's the RCD or the Watershed Center, of actually getting work done. It's the planning. Planning is continuing to hamstring us.
But do you think though the push from above will continue to make the disease-related CE projects the #1 priority regardless of?
So the message that we're getting from the administration right now is there's going to be a stronger and stronger push for just volume. So integrated veg type projects, which is the pilot project or Burnt Ranch or anything that has sort of a fuels component to it, is probably going to be harder to push. And the prioritization is going to be, how can I get volume?
When you say volume, are you talking commercial volume?
And
Which is painful, but you know, if that's where they're sending money and they're literally taking money from places that can't produce that to put it somewhere that can, you know, I don't know what else to do at this point. I mean, there's plantation work that can potentially produce volume, do meaningful work on the landscape, without going to old school Forest Service.
And so when you plan and implement the project like the West Side, you had your commercial and your service contracts. is that service budgeted already? You know how much it's gonna cost, you have a pot of money for that?
You know, West Side Plantations is interesting.
Or it's different. I'm trying to relate it then to the pilot project. Will the service work be budgeted, or will it be dependent upon the money made off the commercial project?
It'll be both, and that's how we do work on the west side.
Right, but it won't be like we ran out of money and we can't finish the service work.
Correct.
It won't be that. Okay.
There may be a distinction in your language when you say, is it budgeted? Does not mean that there's money set aside for it. Just means that they know how much they need to come up with to do that service work.
So to say that, okay,
Yeah, that's different than what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know.
You know, that there's a guarantee
That they have the money
this will
ready.
get done,
That's right.
and that there's no guarantee.
there is no guarantee, but there is a commitment, and honestly, it's
And-
relatively
and the
easy
money-
for us to move, once it's in implementation, for us to continue to chunk away at that. I mean, we had that same conversation with the Stafford fire
Yeah.
restoration, right? Of, you're never gonna have enough money for this, and we're almost done implementing Stafford, you know?
I mean, we have-
Things work out,
But
when
once-
we get NEPA done.
But once
we
the
have the
funding's been
joint
done,
chiefs.
then you could access other funding sources.
So we do have the Joint Chiefs funding, we do have the greenhouse gas, funding that, the Watershed Center got.
That's just kind of piecemeal though.
It's gonna always be, I think, yeah, but at least there's pieces. There's pieces to the meal.
There was.
You know?
Will there continue to be?
Yeah, well,
And I heard they're reducing the two chiefs' money, they're taking some of that.
So we're getting
back.
90% of what we thought we were going to this year, so we're getting 450,000 instead of 500,000.
And using a fair chunk of that on salvage.
Yeah, from a fuels standpoint.
Is that a reduction for this year and they intend to make it up to last year?
no, they're gonna reduce it.
No,
Right.
theoretically, this is the last year. Our proposal did ask for, what
One more
would be a third year?
Right.
But 3 years of funding we've already received.
That's right. Based on calendar.
So we
Time
probably
goes by
won't do,
so
right?
fast.
Well, Tom, it sounds like, there isn't any wiggle room here for us to suggest anything to you. You're gonna do Dubakella, Burnt Ranch is on the table, the pilot project, and then Hyam Palm. That's all the planning force that you have for the next 2 or 3 years.
So I would say that, there's definitely an opportunity for the collaborative to be engaged with both Dubakella and Hyam Palm, of, what does that look like? How can we be consistent of, how do we have that social license? Both of those projects are gonna be consistent with, working in plantations, working along the roadside and linear features. What are those lessons learned that we can take from what we've worked on? What there's actually meaningful intent to move forward. I understand the frustration that it's not a collaboratively designed project. And honestly, I know the frustration that you're all feeling with the Shasta Trinity, especially compared to the Six Rivers, of what is the priority that the forest applies to this and the ability for us to move something forward. But we are 2 different forests and 2 different forest supervisors, and priorities come down in different ways because of that.
And I think it's very important at the next full collaborative meeting that you're entirely clear to the collaborative, the narrowing of intent, focus, language, conversation that we would basically just be wasting our time having at this point. From your perspective as far as resources and capacity and what the reality is of the future.
Right.
I think that's really important for you to define very clearly.
Yeah.
It's still, the takeaway for me from this whole collaborative process has been how different 2 neighboring forests within the same region can act. It's amazing to me how different they are. Absolutely. I never would have foreseen that.
And honestly, I'm sure I would have acted differently if Merv was my forest supervisor, just because that was the priority that was given to me, as opposed to what I'm hearing from a different forest supervisor. And honestly, the way that the region interacts with either one of these forests is different. The expectation for how we produce target and all of those different things are different, which is what it is.
So are we liable to see Terry Simon Jackson filling that slot for however long before they find another forest supervisor?
There is a potential of that.
Because she doesn't want to deal with a collaborative. We're out of business on the Shasta Trinity with her. She thinks that we're an illegal group because we're not FACA sanctioned. So I guess, if she's going to run the show for a year or so, we might as well just forget about you guys. She doesn't want us to be part of your program.
They're gonna forget
You have
about
the
us.
ability to influence that, right? I mean, you do have somewhat of a relationship with Barney, and, at least a connection to Randy. Randy knows about this collaborative, right? Those are the people that make that decision.
What sanction? What did you say? We're not FICA?
Yeah, remember she came to the collaborative one time and stood up and told us how we were in violation of the Federal Advisory Committee Act and basically said we shouldn't exist on an official basis with the Shasta Trinity. And then Dave got up and, patched it over that, it wasn't his thought, it was her thought.
There's certain criteria that you have to meet
Right, she was very clear.
to be a sanctioned organization through is it Forest Foundation or something?
No, well, you
They
have
have
to be
criteria.
appointed. It's, to be a FACA group, you have to be appointed by the forest.
So it requires the federal agency to, adopt a charter for the organization, and then there's a whole approval process, like the Title II RAC, that was under Secure Rural Schools, or the BLM RAC,
Advisory.
advisory committee. It's monumental in good times, and with the current administration. I mean, the current administration essentially froze and canceled in the Department of Interior all of their FACA chartered advisory committees to go through one of these review things. Do they really need to exist? And that they still have not. So for example, the Trinity Adaptive Management Working Group of the Trinity River Restoration Program was essentially stopped. Because, and all the BLM racks that existed, throughout the West, were frozen, and they haven't operated since January. So the current administration doesn't look favorably on getting groups like us to advise the federal agency on things.
And I kind of thought she just put that out as a smokescreen to say, I don't want to deal with you folks.
But I agree, and I think, maybe through the facilitation team side of things, I need to begin to connect with Barney Gann.
So that was the conversation that we even had about the ability of the collaborative to influence who is selected as a district ranger and as a forest supervisor.
So maybe that'd be a really good thing for you to do.
So I'll
Take
do that.
Be brought up.
Yeah, kind of just start that, And it was something, it was a conversation we were having last December and early January, with Robert Bonney, was, how to build that transition into, for the new administration. And Barney was part of those conversations too. So I'll reach out with an email to him.
Who's Barney?
He's
Barney Gant is the deputy regional
forester.
Under Randy Moore.
one of three, but he focuses on ecosystem services and the budget. So a lot of the things that
we're working on.
And Pat, what's your message, Dan?
We're alive.
That we're kind of at a critical, kind of juncture with regards to the viability of our collaborative.
And ask him for his insights.
How does he?
Yeah.
Is he helping us to make sure we remain as Dave Myers transitions out, that we remain a priority project?
And how do we become, how are we effective?
Yeah.
And they'll describe the threats.
Yeah.
And I would think we want to request that he find replacements that are collaboratively.
Yeah, we want,
Absolutely.
both
Like
acting
service.
and acting supervisor and a supervisor who were supported with the collaboratives.
And they've even had experience with it.
Dave was, right?
Well, yeah, but,
He
you
came
know,
here with experience of collaborating with groups.
Yeah.
So some of us gave that input to Dave regarding the district ranger here in
Right.
Weaverville. So this is
Right,
just
the collaborative.
the next
we
step.
made that special, yeah.
God, this has been a fun meeting so far. I could have stayed home and hit myself, pounding my head against the wall. Accomplish the results. No.
So just speaking of transitions for administration, I just heard an interview or read a Department of Energy and Department of Agriculture. The existing people were all ready for the new administration, had desks set up, had parking, spots ready for the people, name tags, and nobody showed for 2 months.
Yeah, no, I mean, I had
Yeah.
conversations with Robert Bonnie. We helped put together some kind of summary document, kind of white pages, on the collaborative, what the collaborative doing, and he had a binder, and he said he put it, he put the Trinity County Collaborative. He had a whole section on kind of key collaboratives, and then of course, because they weren't even dealing with appointing and nominating a secretary and all that sort of thing. I mean, Vilsack and all the key staff they went home.
So our associate chief, Dan Harone, is still in this department because there's nobody to interface with.
Yeah.
and we have a new chief. Does he know anything about us, you think?
Oh, no. Tony took. So he was part of the executive leadership team. So the chief and the associate chiefs and regional foresters. So he probably does. Dave went back there and had conversations maybe a year ago now. And so Tony was a part of, that group that he spoke to.
Maybe
When I talked to Barney about how to kind of elevate it back to the DC level.
Well, it sounds like we know where all the planning resources are going for the next 3 years or so. Doesn't seem like our big project is gonna happen.
It sure feels like our wave of potential with the collaborative is past its crest. The support from Tidwell and Vilsack and Bonnie and where we are now and what's happening up until now.
But I never saw the benefits of that. I've always just seen it from our district rangers and our forest. To me, the people that we meet with, I don't know everything about relationships.
Well,
But
yeah.
it seems like that's the important part, is our local ranger and forest supervisor. Isn't that the case?
The ability to be able to work with them.
Work with them, and if they're willing to work with us.
But you're right, but now, the limitations are so dramatic.
But that's regardless of,
Yes.
if we have people back that we could talk to and these
Yeah,
things.
I would say, there is focus of, what is my priority that comes from on high of, oh yeah, do it in this way, focus in this way. That has shifted in this last year.
But here we are.
Oh, absolutely. And the intent is still there. I think at a local level, we still, there's a benefit for us to engage with the collaborative, to design things collaboratively with you all. How we move that forward and how successful we are. What I'm able to bring to the table, essentially, I can bring, well, this is my priority, can you get on board? That's sort of the new paradigm that we're under, right? It's not, how do we all design a project and all move in the same direction?
It's totally,
Just that's major, just is that goal
That
right
is.
there.
It's totally reversed, because we started out, here's our priority, can you get on board? And now it's 100%.
Which is interesting, because it's almost back to where we started, right? So the Shasta Trinity, when I first came here, we were saying, here's our projects. Are these things that you can support as a collaborative, right? And we were moving towards, how do we design a project together? How do I take your priorities and make them into something? And we're almost back to, here's what I got, can you support any of it?
But if we're, at least now, even something like the Highland Pond project or the Dubuquella project, they're named projects, but they're totally undesigned. They have no prescription.
Correct. We know that
So
Dubuquella is going to
at
be
least
a plantation
we've
project.
made that, we're that much better off, because before it was, here's the Burnt Ranch project, we've already got a design concept, can you live with it? You know, it's the same thing we went through in the early days of the RAC. You know, we had money, and the Forest Service would come and say, here, you know, we got a plantation over here, and we got a burn over here, and you know, and the RAC said, well, yeah, but those aren't our priorities. I mean, if you want our money, you know, we want things that, you know, that are in the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. And it took a couple of years of Forest Service getting there, and it took the RAC actually funding, you know, the NEPA, you know, to help get some of those projects like Mad Ridge, you know, online. You know,
Another example, Pat's Community Forest with the Browns already
Yeah,
designed,
yeah.
trying to make it so they could live
It
with
had-
it.
it had been a project
versus-
for 10 years.
Versus the
Yeah.
BLM where we were in the
Right.
beginning on how to design them.
Yeah.
So I think there's still that opportunity, because there's still the intent of, okay, if this is the direction I have to move, how can I work with you to design the best possible project, knowing that this is my priority? Can we work with that, or is that not something that you want to engage? As opposed to, hey, this is a project that's already fully fleshed out, can you support it or not? I mean, we've
Yeah,
definitely
that's a
gained
good-
that capacity to say, I'm not designing new projects without actually talking to you about, here's a concept that we're moving toward.
Unless you're getting direction from on high to not deal with this, which is a possibility that we're concerned about.
At least within Region 5, given the current leadership structure, that's
Yeah,
not
so
so priority.
So our specific fear is to have Jackson being either detail or permanent or a suit, saying that she doesn't recognize us, doesn't want to deal with us. It looms over us.
Right.
Sharon Haywood, you know, she's kind of a leftover from Sharon Haywood. We met in this room with Sharon Haywood one day, and she said, collaboration takes too much time, and I don't have time for it, get lost.
Yep.
And Terry Simon Jackson's the same mindset.
Seems cool. So it's a very real
I think that was
challenge
before you
for
were
us.
here, Tom.
I think it was as
It
well.
was, yeah, it was before Tom was.
Oh, well, I guess in December, if you're gonna be at the collaborative, you need to lay out your ideas for these 3 projects, how you're gonna get them done, and I think that, you know, we'll either have to buy in or tell you to get lost.
Okay.
And we'll get back to you on that.
Right. The collaborative's gonna need to figure out where we are going from here forward, you know.
6 Rivers.
That-
Yeah, that's right, we're going west. Go west, Joe.
That's the obvious direction, except it's so far from everything, you know, it's, from my neighborhood, it's getting pretty far out there. They're awesome to deal with, but it's a long ways away. It's all day, whatever we do.
And there's gonna be an ID team meeting at Mad River at the end of the
The
month.
30th, same day as the community forest steering
Yeah.
meeting, so, anyway.
So I think, you know, we can make progress there. It seems like it's not in everybody's backyard, but at least they're on board to move ahead and do collaborative projects, so.
And we'll have a good example, hopefully, over a period of time of what can really happen to the community and come. Nothing personal.
Yeah.
Well, anything else to talk about?
Just go home and beat our head against the
No, I'm gonna go drink.
That's the way of doing it. Self-medication.
take the 47 road over to 6th Road.
Oh, you came that way today?
I'm gonna go home that way.
What is that, is that trail line?
Crowd out it, yeah.
It's about a
Yeah,
half
flat
hour longer.
giving it a number.
Yeah.
I hate it when people. What was that?
I said, it's about a half hour longer.
Yeah, not bad.
They actually found